degree in biochemistry. And I'll let Karen introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen. I'm also from U of T, and I'm a master's student in laboratory medicine and pathobiology, and I'm really excited to join you today with Jennifer.
Awesome. Yeah, so perfect. So I'm going to start off with a presentation focused on, of course, the of moment COVID-19 and how this relates to misinformation on social media. And then Karen's going to direct more of our second presentation on more general cross-disciplinary ideas about alternative science facts or misinformation. And through this whole thing, we're going to ask people to participate. So to turn on your microphone, contribute, or to type in the chat box, because it's a lot of asking you questions and trying to look at information and think about what your first impression is, and then critically analyze material. So participating will be great. So I'm just going to try to share my screen, make sure that that works. You can all see there. Awesome. Cool. So this was developed by one of our leaders of Let's Talk Science at the St. George campus, and it's talking about COVID-19, kind of what's been shared about the virus on social media, and how social media can lead to the spread of things that aren't accurate. So our first question is from the audience about what are some things, examples of misinformation that you've seen recently? So things on Facebook or Instagram or just the internet, wherever that you've seen that are ideas about COVID-19 that you think are suspicious or that you know aren't true.
Melody, Christine, Angel, can you share your experience?
Oh, yes. May I share something?
Yeah, sure.
So, again, COVID-19 is a thing that we're still continuously dealing with. First, I want to apologize. My daughter's running around at the background. So if you hear little kids screaming, I do apologize. We are set to, like, as secondary and as secondary teachers, we're set to get our vaccine. So we've been hearing a lot of different information regarding the vaccine. For example, one information is that if you get the vaccine, you might have a different, how do you say, severe adverse reaction to it, which generally, yes, maybe for some people, but in a general sense, it's generally safe. The vaccine for even for Johnson & Johnson, where we just got our first ship. We'll be getting our first shipment to Canada next week, so that's very concerning, and it's probably not the. We should probably do a lot more reading and research on it.
Yeah, that was a great example, and I think it's hard because that's such an important public health thing, right? That we're hoping that our governments are providing great messaging about that kind of drowns out any misinformation, but I definitely don't think that's actually the case in terms of what people are seeing and the information they're getting. Anybody else have any ideas of things they saw? Anybody? Maybe we'll continue.
I want to share. In the beginning, I saw many videos how to boost up your immune system, which food is good for against COVID, blah blah blah. There's so many app or any like some life hack something video promoting clickbait. These are.
That's very true. One of the scary ones that I saw recently was it's this anti-lockdown group that's linked to this organization of nurses. So it's registered nurses who have the same ideas about how we just need to let our body's natural immune system fight off the virus, which is extremely harmful because they're registered medical professionals. So they should be the people that you're listening to for advice. So that becomes an extra complicated layer of how do I, as a young person or as a citizen, understand why that my information might not be accurate. So that's kind of what we're talking about today, is how do we piece apart those things.
Exactly.
Perfect. So when Hannah was learning about this survey series that was done about misinformation online, they found that most people found misinformation online. They saw misinformation online and identified that. And that importantly, it's saying here over 50% of people use social media posts to find information. And I know I definitely do. Most of the news little bites that I'm keeping up with are things that are kind of integrated into other topics on my social media feeds. And the most worrying stat is that about 40% of people in the survey saw information that they thought was true, but then they later found out that it wasn't true through talking to others or more research or other things coming out in the news to dispel that. And so what we want is for people to look at a post and try to think themselves, is this information accurate, and investigate into that, do some fact checking as it's often referred to. And in the survey, they found that it was about 50-50 in the percent of people who did that. So about half of people did some more fact checking themselves before sharing that information with others. But 50% of people took that information at face value and shared it right away. So hopefully I can play this media. Let me know if you can see it. And this is talking more about this idea of misinformation, or let me know if you can hear it.
No. If you can click on share audio, then share computer audio, and you share this sound.
Ooh, perfect. Okay. I've clicked that. Let's see.
Share this video because I'm going to tell you the truth that we have no reason to believe that COVID vaccines will have any effect on fertility. But what if I lied to you? What if I even just asked a question and said, hey, what if these vaccines affect your fertility? What if you can't have kids afterwards? Then you'd probably get scared and concerned, and you might even text it to a friend and say, hey, have you heard about this? Should we be worried about this? And that's how misinformation spreads, because it uses your emotions and it relies on stories, even untrue ones. They don't even have to show any facts to get it to spread. But the facts are this: there is no evidence that these vaccines have any effect on fertility. Pregnancy rates were the same between vaccinated and unvaccinated groups in the clinical trials. And now with millions of people vaccinated, we still see no effects on fertility. But local woman gets vaccine and nothing happens isn't a headline. Telling you that nothing happened isn't a story. So
in this little clip, I think she hits on a number of important points. So she's talking about this idea that was circulating that getting the vaccine could make it harder for you to have kids, and how people would have found this scary and that this information could have spread. So one part she talks about is emotions, about how this is thought to make you feel scared and elicit a strong emotional reaction, and how often news that's not true or not entirely true uses this tactic to get its message around. And she's also talking about how you sharing it with your friends, even just to ask their opinions, is still sharing it. So I found that very interesting. Is the person who created this presentation gave a tip of, if you see something and you want to talk to your friend about it, or you want to even say it's wrong, but tell other people that this information is wrong, is taking a screenshot of it and sharing that screenshot or forwarding that screenshot, because then you're not promoting that post. Because we think about, algorithms on Facebook and things. If we're liking, or if we're just sharing things, it's still going to show up on more people's feeds, which is not what we want if the information is inaccurate. So I thought that was a good tip. And as a final point on this, she's saying about how a local woman gets a vaccine and nothing happens isn't a very sensational story. But we can also be thinking then, is something that we're trying to do, create positive news stories and get those around, and how can we increase the circulation of accurate information by telling good stories. Because I think something that I've learned, in my education so far, an undergraduate degree, and definitely in grad school, is that a big part of science is telling a story. When you write a scientific publication, you're not just writing down what you did, you're telling the story of your research and trying to sell that story, which I think is a way that we can help spread accurate information, is through good storytelling.
I'm going to share this video because I'm going to tell you.
Next slide. Cool. So to avoid spreading misinformation, these are some ideas of what you can do, and what we're going to keep talking about for the rest of the night, is to investigate more into what you saw. So try to find other sources of news or that confirm or talk about this thing that you've heard. To not engage with it, so not commenting or sharing or anything on things that are misinformation, that aren't true. To report it. So a lot of social media has flag functions. So if you have something that's untrue, especially something that can be dangerous, right? With COVID, spreading misinformation could be really detrimental to public health. So you can flag that and say, hey, this person's spreading inaccurate information with the public. And like I was mentioning, spread positive messages of science, spread trustworthy news stories that say exciting things about vaccine development, and amplify news sources that or you think are trustworthy. So we can share this after, but so that you can look into it in the future. But Hannah, who created this presentation, came up with this great list of accounts to follow to try to get good science information into your feed, so that you're seeing things that are celebrating science, celebrating good investigation and reporting on science and on COVID. And as a question to the audience again, to wrap up this little presentation before we go into the bulk of our class today, is: have you ever done anything to stop misinformation? Have you ever tried to follow some good sources and get some accurate news into your feed? Or have you ever flagged or reported or anything?
Yes, I did. I unfollowed 3 of my friends from my Facebook.
Because of COVID?
Yes. Because they are negative person, and they can spread their negative energy to me. So this is the time to stop them and kick them out from my FB.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. And it's interesting how it interfaces with businesses too. A local business, one of their employees posted on their personal account an article that was supposedly a leaked message from the federal government, where they were planning COVID as like a control tactic.
Yes.
And it ended up, the business ended up having to comment on it because they were an employee. So it's interesting how that all links online.
Yeah, like being a teacher, if I share that information to other people, that will be more reliable. So this is our responsibility to stop this misinformation, because people rely on us. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any other student? Helen? Jason? Can you add up your experience? Jason, you can add anything.
Are we adding experience about misinformations?
Yes.
Yeah, misinformation with COVID mostly, but whatever.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few at the start of the pandemic in Vietnam back in maybe March of last year, where they were saying like this whole kind of thing. People just misunderstood this for like a flu or a cold. It's not that bad, but then it's escalate like all over the place around May, and it's got worse. And somewhat on April, that there was not a lot of precautions. He was like, "Oh, you're just overreacting, my friend. It's not that big." Like we kind of have this kind of thing where we listen to the elders a bit more than what we read or kind of research because well, mostly our parents are right, you know. We kind of taught that way, but then it's kind of get worse, and we realize, oh yeah, this is not like a flu or cold. We should take this a little bit more seriously. And there's also this kind of weird reaction of people hoarding stuff where they just go to the store and grab like 30 packs of face mask and 3,000 packs of ramen noodles because they were gonna be thought they were gonna lock down for like an eternity when really they're not. So yeah, I think it's kind of the things that happened around me at the time. But with informations and the people and kind of placing their trust in the government and the government actually reporting a lot of good information back to the citizen, we kind of cooperated and everything's kind of resolved now. And Vietnam has been very safe recently. There's only like a few cases pop up like every 2 or 3 weeks, and it's mostly people escaping from other countries like Thailand or Myanmar to Vietnam. So I think yeah, Vietnam at first a little bit and with the informations, but now everything's working out very good.
That's a great point in terms of the change in learning about the virus over the course of the pandemic, which I think is a great point in terms of misinformation of maybe at the start of the pandemic, the idea that it was like a common cold or a common flu was just because we didn't know any better, right? Nobody actually knew what was going on. But now at this stage, when we have more information, now that becomes misinformation, the people who keep perpetuating the idea that it's just like a flu, even though we know all this information to the contrary, and that it's actually a lot more serious. So in thinking about what are facts and what scientific information we communicate with the public, we also have to remember that scientists are trying to keep up. And I think COVID was a great example of that, is it was really confusing and there was a lot of changes early on, but it's also because we didn't have information to start with. So I think that's a really good point. Cool. Now, as we move on, Karen, do you want to share your screen for the second presentation, or do you want me to share it?
Either way is fine. You can share the screen if you can.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll bring up the other presentation and I will do that. Yeah, of course. Okay. Awesome. Cool.
Great. So now we're going to move on to the second section of our workshop. So we're going to talk about alternative science facts. So Jennifer already mentioned the effects of misinformation on COVID and what the impacts are if the facts that we are communicating are not correct. So the objectives of the session is to really think about why it is important for scientists to communicate science and why is communicating science important for the public. For example, in the case of the pandemic or in other cases for diseases or otherwise, And also we are going to share some examples of careers in science communication. And we're going to think critically about what is quote unquote fake news and how it can impact our perception of, for example, the pandemic or what's going on in our lives. And also we are going to think about how we can spot this fake news and make sure that the information we are getting is correct. So this session is going to be really interactive. So I would encourage everyone to unmute themselves to speak up, or if you feel more comfortable, you can also put your thoughts into the chat. So for the first activity, we're going to look at some memes. For the following slides, there will be some memes, and when we can look at it together and assess the message that's being communicated in the memes, and think about whether the information is reliable or not. So, for example, looking at the olive oil, there's a meme that's being circulated on social media. So it's being presented here. It says nearly half of all olive oil brands are mislabeled. Some contain a mix of up to 80% GMO canola, soy, corn, and or cottonseed oil. So do you think this meme is true or false, or a mixture of both? Does anyone have any? Yeah, do you think this meme is accurate or not?
No, this is false.
Okay, does anyone else have any thoughts? You can just type true or false in the chat, or you can unmute yourself.
Guys, just type no. Okay. One student replied no. Any other student, what do you think?
Oh, sorry.
Dorothy, Alexi, Chris, what do you think?
Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah. So right now, the majority of the students says no, and the actual answer is it's a mixture of both truth and false. So actually, there has been a claim that's been circulating in social media. So a study showed, the claim is that a study showed that 69% of all store-bought extra virgin olive oils in the US are probably fake. And this is actually both true and false. The true part is that actually a lot of olive oil brands did not meet the criteria to be labeled as extra virgin, so they are mislabeled. But the false part is it's not nearly half. So we didn't know how they get this number, so we don't know why they say nearly half, but there are some popular brands that did not meet the criteria of extra virgin. So extra virgin is a category, and it is the top grade of olive oil according to the standards established by the International Olive Council, or IOC, and the US Department of Agriculture, or USDA. So in addition to establishing the chemistry standards for extra virgin olive oil, those departments also have established a censoring standard. So the oil must have 0 defects and have greater than 0 fruitness. Yeah, so this is an example of a meme that's based on kind of half-truths. But it's being circulated a lot, and there are different variations of this meme.
Oh. Go to the next one there. Karen, would you be able to share the first article in the chat?
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. You can see it better than me. Another bit of information that was being shared, making its rounds on social media, was the idea that fluoride in water was reducing children's IQ. So in areas with higher fluoridation levels, that was causing kids to have brain damage, which is being communicated in this infographic here. And Karen's sharing in the chat a link to an article by the Huffington Post that was originally talking about this study. So if you can, in 1 second, we have that article. If you can read that to start, we're going to have everybody read that article from the Huffington Post and give you a few minutes to do that. And then we're going to come back together and talk about what we thought about that article. Do we think it's presenting a good argument? Why or why not? Would we fact check this if we read it on our own? So if you take a minute to do that, and then maybe write in the chat when you're done reading the article, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's the second link that I shared.
Either talking and unmuting ourselves or in the chat box about if we think this article is reliable, if we trust the information in that article, if we just read it alone, or any other thoughts of that sort.
Based on the author name and her designation, how we can doubt about the fact and the data. So here it says that 99% of fluoride ended up in drain system and into the environment. And what is next? Ultimately, this fluoride, this fluoride ion can change water equilibrium state?
Mm. I guess I'll start our debunking. So on an article that on a website that we're using a lot here, that was linked to the olive oil too, that kind of evaluates the validity of all these claims. Their evaluation of this is that it's false. So to pick apart some of it, so a good point about the author. So it sounds like it's being written by a doctor who should know about these things. But this person is actually a doctor of osteopathic medicine, so not an MD, which you wouldn't know from the doctor designation. And he's a big time celebrity. So he's big into the wellness game, has his own, website, is well known as kind of an anti-fluoride leader and kind of capitalizes on this crusade to form his brand. So it's showing it's really important to think about who are the people who are writing your articles and what are their motivations. So a good point there. And another thing that could alert you to the fact that this article claims shouldn't necessarily be trusted is the kind of conversational and emotional language getting into after they state the study. So he's saying, it's truly remarkable that it's not considered a scientific consensus right now. Talking about how he doesn't understand how all these other people aren't getting it right. And he's calling the medical community stubborn, and that kind of denying all of those sources of evidence and kind of having a conversation with you about what's really right is kind of a flag. And then on the actual topic, it's quite interesting. So in the fact-checking article, which I'll share in the chat here as well, but you don't have to read it all right now. It's quite long. They talk about one that in a lot of the studies, when they're looking at people in high and low fluoridation level communities, so how much fluoride is found in their water where they live, the high group is actually way higher than is actually legally allowed. So it's not saying that, you know, normal fluoridation levels are bad. It's saying we already think this is bad. It's really bad. And in the low level of fluoridation categories, there was actually a lot of communities that was normal fluoridation. So it wasn't, you know, saying here, see, when we don't put fluoride in the water, people are healthier. It's saying, oh, when we put fluoride in the water like we normally do, things are fine. So thinking about what we actually think about high and low. And then a lot of the fact-checking article goes into article by article, thinking about what they're actually saying, which is quite important if you're looking at a meta study. For example, they pointed out that a couple of articles actually they didn't say that higher fluoridation levels are linked to lower IQ. And sorry, I had another really great conclusion here. Oh, and then in terms of motivations, they found that 4 of the 8 papers, of 8 of the papers in part of the study were published also in an anti-fluoridation group journal. So it was a scientific journal, but it was run by a group that's already against fluorinated water. So thinking about, you don't want your scientific journals to have a preset stance about what they think is right, because then they're not going to incorporate evidence that might show to the contrary. So looking at where things are being published and who they're being published to, which is a big point about people needing to declare conflicts of interest. So if you're ever listening to a presentation at the university level and somebody who's a professor is presenting, they're going to have to say if they're have been given money or if they work with companies. Often it's people working with drug development companies. I know I was listening to a discussion about the microbiome, all the bacteria in our gut, and the professor who was giving it also had contracts with a company that made probiotic supplements. So he was getting money from them. So thinking about that when you're looking at the information, it doesn't always mean that what they're telling you isn't good science, but it's always something to keep in mind. So with all that talking, I'll let Karen go to the third one.
Yeah, so the one we're showing here is called Bloody Bananas. So the memes that's being circulated is saying that authorities said a major grocery store pulled all the bananas from its shelves this week after a customer called police to investigate a suspicious banana that appeared to contain blood. Officers were called to the Persons Branch in the Jackson County city of Independence about 10 a.m. Tuesday after an identified person said a family member ate a banana that looked as if someone had injected with human blood, according to a news release. So do people think this news is accurate, or do people think there's actually bloody bananas that's being circulated around? Yeah, and you can also see that in the figure here, it says it's breaking news from CNN, and the bananas in Oklahoma Walmart test positive for HIV virus. So what does everyone think about this picture or this piece of news?
Banana normally react with air oxygen because it has oxide, so iron oxide. So it can looks like a bloody brown color. And HIV, this is wrong.
Yeah, so I think for this picture, it's pretty obvious that it's not actually bloody bananas. So from the fact-checking article that we mentioned before, it says that this is actually caused by a type of fungus. So this reddish discoloration has nothing to do with blood, and it's actually a fungal or bacterial disease that affects bananas that's been grown in some areas.
And actually, who will eat this type of banana? When you peel banana, food, if the food is not appealing, who will eat that?
Yeah. So this is also a picture that's being widely circulated on social media. So after someone posted on Facebook saying that the banana is weird and maybe it's being infected with HIV. And also about HIV being circulated or HIV being infected through food. There has been very rare cases where children has consumed food that has been pre-chewed by their caregiver who had HIV. And in that very rare cases, HIV can be transmitted through food, but it is very rare, and HIV has not been spread through food.
But that is caused by her caregiver saliva.
Yeah.
Food is not responsible itself.
Yeah. So yes, the HIV virus cannot. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, it was crazy to seeing the posts that were circulating in terms of what people were writing, because they were writing, you know, the hospital tested the banana contained blood, you know, which isn't even true, but it's just, you know, some person on Facebook that now becomes a trusted source of information. Cool, next slide.
Yeah, so for the second activity here, we're going to look at articles. So for the following slides, there will be a few articles, and we can each take some time to read the article on our own. And when we read it, we can consider who is writing the article, what is the source. So as Jennifer mentioned before, to check whether the authors are credible, whether they have other interests in mind or other motivations. How are the arguments being presented? Is there any other evidence to support the articles? And after we read it and consider it, we will discuss our thoughts on the article, and we will also give a link to a fact-checking article that actually unpacks the original article that we're reading. And we will again reflect together on our fact-checking work.
Cool. So our first one is going to be the idea that bacon and processed meats cause cancer, and the emergence of this idea from a big scientific study. So I'm just going to share the article there in the chat to a Daily Mail article that talked about this. And And again, if you just want to take the time to read that and then try to check in with the chat so we know how you're doing in terms of reading the article. Is true. And for this one, it's more of an idea about thinking about the way we communicate science and thinking about statistics. So I was really interested in this article, which was suggested for this activity, but also came up in a book that I'm reading about the art of statistics. So in this article also on this topic by BBC, what they point out is thinking about the way we communicate this in terms of numbers. So saying that there's an 18% increase in risk sounds really scary and sounds like a huge number. You know, that sounds, we're thinking 18, we're thinking 20%, we're thinking ratios like 1 in 5. But if you're communicating this risk in terms of relative risk, what it actually looks like is in the UK, about 6 out of 100 people are already going to get bowel cancer at some point. And what it's saying, if there's in this group of 100 people and everybody's eating a lot of bacon, one more person out of that group of 100 is expected to get colon cancer as a result of eating bacon. Which is not to say that it's not true that there's this link. It's not to say that this isn't something that should be considered when we're making health decisions, but it is saying that an extra 1 out of 100 sounds a lot less scary than an extra 18%. So so that it's important to consider how we're communicating these numbers with the public and the fact that the science just doesn't speak for itself. We have to think about the statistics that come out of our analyses and what numbers are going to most accurately convey risk to the public and how we can explain that. So I thought this one was really interesting in the fact that it does totally have scientific merit behind it, but it's a lot about how we're communicating those numbers. Any other thoughts on bacon? Is anybody going to stop eating bacon forever? Do we not think this is worrisome?
So lamb is safe as a meat?
So they think that the highest risk is processed meats, but that red meat, and they're including lamb in this, is also considered like slightly lower risk, but still like something that could be attributed as a risk factor for cancer. But it becomes too about benefits and drawbacks, right? It's saying don't eat a large serving of these meats every single day, but if you eat it in moderation, you can still get vitamins and minerals and protein and all these valuable things from it. You don't want people to swing from A to B just because of this one study and the scary words.
Okay, so we need to balance our food, right?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Let's go for vegan. That's the solution.
I'm pescatarian, so I'm not eating any red meat. So this didn't worry me at all.
And also we can help our climate.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I'll let Karen do aluminum foil.
Yeah, so the next article that we are going to share is going to talk about Alzheimer's risk through the exposure of aluminum foil. So I'm going to post the article link in the chat, and you can take a few minutes to look through the article and let us know what you think.
Do you have any scientific information regarding plastic wrap?
Not right now, but I could always search PubMed.
Ziploc, because these are also daily life heavily used products.
The input. So actually for this article is mostly false.
Good. Yes,
yeah.
we win.
So yeah, everyone's right. So this is also in terms of the amount of aluminum that you will actually be exposed to when you're using the foil. So in the article, it claims that if you cook with aluminum foil, you're playing with your health. The first thing you need to know is that aluminum is bad for your brain. It's a neurotoxic heavy metal that's been linked to Alzheimer's disease for years. So actually, this claim is false on several levels. So this claim rests on three assertions. So first, it's supposed that cooking with aluminum foil will liberate the aluminum, and this aluminum will be transferred to your food, which will be injected. And then second, this aluminum will actually reach your brain in a concentration that's high enough to affect your brain and cause Alzheimer's. And third, high concentrations of aluminum in your brain will actually lead to increased risk of Alzheimer's. So we are going to address the first assumption. And the first assumption is that aluminum will be liberated when you're cooking food with aluminum foil. So this is actually correct. So when you're cooking with the aluminum foil, the aluminum could be liberated because of, for example, because of the increased temperature that you're using to cook the food, it can liberate the aluminum foil. And also when there's acid, it can also liberate the metal such as aluminum. But for the second assumption is that the aluminum that's being exposed to your food can be transferred to your brain, and this is largely false. So actually, a very small amount of aluminum can be transferred to your brain when you eat the aluminum. So it's about 0.06% to 0.4% when they are doing study in rats and in healthy humans. So that's the amount that can be actually absorbed by your brain when you eat aluminum. So the third is whether this small amount of aluminum can actually affect and damage your brain. And this is largely false. So because the amount is so small, it's very likely that it will not affect your brain in any way. But there are some studies that are still investigating the effect of aluminum on Alzheimer's or on brain. And right now in the scientific field, it's quite mixed. So some people are saying that the aluminum might be playing a role in Alzheimer's disease or other brain disease, but some are saying they don't actually affect that much. So it's mixed at the end, but largely by using aluminum foil, it will not affect your brain in the way that will increase the risk of Alzheimer's.
Cool. So our next article here is the very, I think, wildly circulated idea that there's a link between vaccinations and autism. So I'm going to share another article in the chat that you have some time to read. It's the one that's by globalresearch.ca. What I really want everybody to think about is not just whether you think this is true or not based on your knowledge, but thinking about what in this website and what in this article would lead you to believe either way. Like if you were just to come across this, does the website look reliable? What kind of language is being used? Who's writing it? And think about how that would influence your opinion, even if you didn't know anything about the topic going in. So a study, but I think it pretty good point in terms of when we're thinking about scientific outcomes, especially with treatments and disease, we have to think about sample size. So we need to have a big sample size of people, and we need to have controls, and we need to compare them. So you need to have a huge group of people who get the vaccine, who get vaccinated, and people who don't get vaccinated, and see what their outcomes are. And we're trying to it's trying to disentangle, is anything different because of this one factor, of course, and also is there a means of causation instead of correlation. But in terms of the fact check of this, and the article I shared is a meta study on pediatrics thinking about adverse events from vaccination, and they found overwhelming evidence that there's no link between autism and vaccinations, that the same frequency of kids would have, if they hadn't gotten vaccinated, they still would have been autistic or not autistic. And to kind of reassure people, it's almost reassuring that they're following their scientific methodology, is they did find links with vaccines and other health outcomes. With certain vaccines, there's can be effects on seizures as a risk of an adverse outcome, and there can be risks in kids who are already immunocompromised. So it's not to say that vaccines don't have side effects, it's just to say that autism is not going to be one of them. And the important thing we want to think about is, this website. Does this website look reliable? Hopefully you don't think so in terms of its layout and imagery. It looks pretty unprofessional. If we look into the authors, I was just doing a quick Google search. The Dr. Gary Null is a known person who thinks that all diseases can be healed through nutrition. So he doesn't really believe in HIV/AIDS. He thinks cancer should be addressed through dietary therapy. And his doctor certification is that he did a PhD in nutritional sciences from a distance university by remote learning, way before that was a thing because of COVID. So thinking about who wrote that. And then there's thinking about kind of the language and the inflammatory nature. Again, midway through this article, we're looking about how basically how they're saying that the American media is like holding hands with the federal government, and they're all in this big mission in order to tell people this lie, which probably isn't the way you'd forward an argument if you were a scientist or a science communicator trying to talk about a study with the public. You probably wouldn't make those kind of statements. So I think those kind of things are important to recognize in how we're reading these articles. But it does get confusing in that you see at the bottom of the article they cite things. So you're thinking, oh, maybe this is reputable. They have all these citations. But as I think we all know from being on the internet our whole lives, is that you can really find arguments to support anything that you believe in. So just because somebody has cited other things doesn't mean the whole argument is solid.
Is there any law against this type of misinformation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what.
Because who has this time to Google, to search, to find their a credential, whether they are an expert person or this is fake, blah, these are.
Yeah, it's true. I don't know what it is in terms of the like internet as a whole, but we've seen a lot of action and discussions about this with Facebook and with Instagram, and them both taking a lot of action to remove COVID misinformation in particular, but trying to get sites that have direct control over what's being shared on them. People are trying to say if information isn't accurate, you shouldn't allow it to exist on your platform. Because it's a public health hazard. So that's true. But yeah, so I think a lot of this conversation about what students' responsibility are and everybody in terms of sharing these kind of things, and what we'll continue on the presentation about is maybe you don't have time to research everything, but don't share something as an idea if you haven't taken that time, especially if it's a big deal. But I'll throw it back to Karen for a minute if that's all right, and we'll. Oh, actually, I can speak. Do you want me to speak to this, Karen? Did I put it in there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So I read this article in the Walrus, a great Canadian magazine, in my personal opinion, that was done by a journalist talking about fact checking and her experience as a fact checker. And in this quote, she's talking about how fake news, which is a phrase we hear a lot, isn't the most informative. And she suggests two different types of classifications. So we can think about disinformation as being something that is false on purpose. So somebody's telling you something knowing it's wrong, but they want you to believe it for whatever reason, versus misinformation of it being accidentally false. So a newspaper article published the wrong thing, or you thought something was true and you told somebody else, but it actually wasn't. And thinking about how these two different things shape our conversations, so that knowing that sometimes it's a mistake, but sometimes it's on purpose. And that the motivation for these people for disinformation, when people are doing it on purpose, can be for different reasons. One of them we've already talked about today when I was talking about how people can be funded by pharmaceutical companies or different things. So we're thinking about people being motivated because of profit, because if they forward a claim, even if it's not true, they can make money off of sharing that information. It could be for political gain. And this is linked to the last thing, which Vivian also talks about in the Walrus article, which is to demonstrate allegiance to a social movement or group. So thinking about maybe we share an article and we don't necessarily believe in what it's saying, or we don't bother to check what it's saying, but we believe in the broader message. So somebody who doesn't like lockdowns and thinks lockdowns are harming businesses might share a post talking about how COVID isn't serious, or COVID's just the flu, or about how masks do nothing. And they probably don't fact check that. They might not even believe it, but it demonstrates the fact that they're part of this bigger movement of being anti-lockdown. So thinking about how often the information we share is kind of forming our social image, and that might be the reason that people are sharing information, even if they don't check it. Which is important for us, even if you're trying to share something to say, I believe in this in a wholehearted way, you still want to make sure that the information contained in that is truthful. I guess I'll throw it back to Karen.
Yep, so we are going to share a few tips on how we can spot fake news. So some examples. First, using all caps. or using photos that has been photoshopped. When there are a lot of pop-ups or banner ads, so this can suggest that the website is trying to gain profit, for example, by using a lot of advertisement, trying to get people to click on it. And also, for example, you can check the domain name. So some of the legitimate domain name include, for example, edu, something.org, .gov, .com. For example, .com might be just some private business, but for .gov, maybe the information might be coming from the government and might be more accurate, for example. So it's important to check the websites and also the photos or the general outline or layout of the website when you're looking for information. And some other examples include, for example, making you angry. So as we mentioned before, when journalism uses sensationalization to make you angry or using overly emotional things. And you can also use Google to reverse image search and to see whether a photo has been photoshopped or whether the photo has a different origin from what the authors are citing. And also you can check the date of the news or the date the story was written and to see whether the information might be outdated. So in science, the information are always updating as we are doing research and finding out more. So some information might be correct a few years ago, but it might be outdated. And also you can look at the news source to see whether it's reputable. So for example, we are looking at scientific journals. There are some journals like Nature, Science, or other journals. They are really reputable and very established. And also there are some journals that might be, for example, predatory or they are trying to gain profit, and they might not be peer reviewed, or they might be citing evidence they are false. And lastly, you can also look at the references or citations at the end to see whether the authors are providing evidence to support their arguments. So yes, these are some of the tips that we can use to find out whether the information might be correct or not.
Yeah, and great point in terms of with our studies in the scientific field changing all the time. I'm trying to do research for my project at school, and now that I know more about it, I can read an article from 2015, and the information in that article that's published in a good journal, it was well done science, is now considered incorrect with what we know more of. So that's a really good point. And very difficult to do as a student when you're studying it, because it's easy to make mistakes if you're not keeping up with everything.
Yeah. And another point is there is so much information out there right now. So there are more and more journals and more articles being published as more people are engaging in research. And I think it's harder and harder to actually figure out whether an article is accurate or not, or whether they're doing quote unquote good science or not, because the information are out there, not just the social media, but actually the scientific journals and all. Yeah. So we can go to the next.
Yeah, I can do it. So this is an example, a quote from a person running for state senate in 2017. that has us thinking about what role do politicians have in being educated in the sciences and communicating that to folks. So this guy is suggesting that climate change has to do with the fact that we're moving closer to the sun every year, and that there's a lot of people and they're warm, which hopefully to you sounds silly and not like a good argument, but this is a person, you know, who's saying statements to a broad group of people who trust him, who already probably have an interest in what he's saying, and this is the kind of information that he's forwarding and saying from a position of authority. But it's interesting if you notice at the bottom right of the slide here that this quote came from a presentation he was making to a natural gas group. So he had a vested interest politically in saying to these people who make their money out of fossil fuels that he doesn't think climate change is a big deal, and if they elect him, he won't make a big deal out of it. So that is a flag. But yes, any thoughts on that? But I found this very scary when I read it. Well, yeah, scary. I don't want to listen to you if you haven't been to science class in a long time and you're trying to explain climate change. It's without any citations. It's not a good bet. Yeah, so that was our fun politician fact, but that's our sharing for right now. I know you guys have a very long class time.